Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, Ladies and Gentlemen, herzlich willkommen in unserem wunderschönen Rathaus, um genau zu nehmen im Stadtsenatssitzungssaal. Ein Saal, wie wir gerade geplaudert haben, der nicht nur durch unsere Bürgermeister der vergangenen Jahrzehnte geziert ist, sondern für viele von uns sowohl ein Arbeitsort ist, wo wir täglich Sitzungen haben, aber auch natürlich ein Prunksaal für Veranstaltungen, für Ehrungen und Empfänge wie dem heutigen. Ich freue mich, dass ich Sie in Vertretung des Bürgermeisters Dr. Michael Ludwig heute hier empfangen darf. Dr. Michael Ludwig ist leider heute am Städtetag und als Landeshauptmann der Bundeshauptstadt hier unabdingbar, aber ich darf Ihnen allen die besten Glückwünsche zu Ihrem 45-jährigen Bestehen übermitteln. Mein Name ist Jörg Neumayer, ich bin Sprecher für Digitalisierung, für Medien und Smart City, also auch einige Bereiche, die in Ihren Analysen das eine oder andere Mal vorkommen. Ich habe auch vor 18 Jahren, haben wir vorhin erst geplaudert, beim Professor Dr. Ottmar Höll eine Einführungsveranstaltung absolviert und dementsprechend ist mir Ihr Politikfeld nicht ganz unbekannt oder allgemein Ihr Feld, in dem Sie arbeiten. Ich darf Ihnen persönlich auch alles Gute zu Ihrem 45. Geburtstag wünschen. 1979 gegründet ist das oiip, die paar Jahre älter schon als ich. Was hier alles an Erfahrung gesammelt worden ist in einer noch bipolaren Welt, mit dem Eisernen Vorhang, dem Fall der Mauer, End of History, dem Millennium Bug, 9/11 War on Terror und eine Fülle an kriegerischer Auseinandersetzungen und Kriegen bis heute. Nur um hier den Russland-Ukraine-Krieg oder das Auflodern des Nahostkonfliktes mit dem folgenden Krieg zu nennen. Und das sind nur die kriegerischen Auseinandersetzungen, wo momentan der mediale Fokus überhaupt hier in Zentraleuropa drauf liegt. Auch das sind wir uns bewusst. Wenn ich mir diese Großwetterlage ansehe, möchte ich dann als Politiker sagen, ich wäre froh, wenn Sie alle miteinander weniger zu tun hätten. Ich wäre froh, wenn Sie weniger Problemstellungen auf dieser Welt analysieren müssten. Und gleichzeitig bin ich dankbar dafür, dass es dieses oiip gibt und dass diese komplexen Herausforderungen in dieser komplexen Welt analysiert werden, betrachtet werden, an Lösungen gearbeitet wird und damit letztendlich für die Politik hier auch Lösungsempfehlungen dargeboten werden. Für heute darf ich Ihnen einfach einen schönen Abend hier in Wien und eine schöne Feier im Wiener Rathaus wünschen. Ich glaube, den Vergleich, warum Wien die lebenswerteste Stadt ist, erspare ich mir jetzt für uns alle. Der soziale Wohnbau, der geförderte Wohnbau, der öffentliche Verkehr, aber vor allem der Aspekt, dass wir immer wieder eine der sichersten Städte sind. Und ich als Digitalisierungssprecher freue mich, dass wir auch immer wieder eine der innovativsten Städte sind. And finally, to our international guests, I want to give you two a warm welcome. Enjoy your stay in the most livable city in the world. Have many interesting conversations today in the evening and a good time tonight and in Vienna. Alles Gute Ihnen zum Geburtstag und ich freue mich auf eine spannende Veranstaltung. Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Sehr geehrter Herr Gemeinderat, herzlichen Dank für die netten Worte und auch an den Herrn Bürgermeister und die Stadt Wien, dass Sie uns diese Möglichkeit geben, hier die Veranstaltung und die Feier zu unserem 45. Jahrestag hier zu begehen. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll switch to English because most of our guests are from abroad. Welcome, dear Excellencies, friends, colleagues, and supporters of the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. Thank you for joining in celebrating with us our 45th anniversary. For us, this is an important occasion, first of all, to remember the history of this institute, the achievements throughout time, the difficulties, of course, that our institute as an institution was facing throughout time, but also the many successes, and also to look into the future and also present the ideas and perspectives we have for future activities. 1979, when this institute went operational, It was founded by then Chancellor Bruno Kreisky as part of his effort to open Austria, break old structures, and internationalize this country. It's not the only institution that was founded by him back then. Our institute was modeled on the Swedish Institute for International Affairs, which he came to know during his time in exile in Sweden in the Second World War. When he was chancellor, and he was a very active chancellor when it comes to foreign policy, he was convinced that Austria would need something similar, an institute that that functions as a platform for international relations and foreign policy research. Back then, in 1979, the world was, as was mentioned previously, a totally different one. And the year 79 was a particularly interesting one. When you look on Google what happened in 79, you will find the Iranian Revolution that took place, but also the peace treaty. The Camp David peace treaty was signed in 79 between Israel and Egypt. And it was also the year that Margaret Thatcher was elected as first female prime minister in the United Kingdom. And as we all know, she then has become the Iron Lady that, has become famous for her neoliberal policies. So in many regards, many of these things still affect our lives today, be it the Iranian Revolution and its effects, or if we talk about the region, the Middle East, peace in the Middle East is still something we are longing for, and neoliberalism is certainly also something that affects most of our lives. So in that regard, our institute is trying to have a look at long-term developments, analyze long-term conflicts, and also develop perspectives or provide analysis that helps people understand or break it down to their everyday lives. So it's not just looking at the big developments on the international scene, but what we're trying to do is also to elaborate on the effects on us, if you like, as a society. Over the years, I have to say that our institute has developed not only into Austria's leading institute in its field, but also a very active institute and very young institute that collaborates with many institutions, not only across Europe, but across the world, and that receives many scholars as visiting fellows, but also interns from all parts of the world. I will come back to that later. I will lead you through this evening with short inputs on our institute and also provide some facts. But now I would like to leave the word to our president, Dr. Wolfgang Petritsch. Let me quickly introduce him to those of you who haven't got to know him. Wolfgang Petritsch is a retired career diplomat. He was the EU's special envoy for Kosovo, EU chief negotiator at the Kosovo peace talks in Rambouillet and Paris, and then high representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina. And he served also as the Austrian ambassador to the UN in Geneva and the OECD in Paris. And he was a Joseph Schumpeter Fellow at Harvard University. We are very proud that he is our president since 2022. And dear Wolfgang, if I may invite you on stage, thank you.
Thank you. Well, let me start out in German. Vielen herzlichen Dank. Ich danke vor allem auch dem Herrn Abgeordneten Neumayer für die netten Begrüßungsworte und überhaupt der Stadt Wien, dass sie uns diese Möglichkeit geboten hat, hier unsere 45-Jahr-Feier abzuhalten. Ich habe überlegt, 45 Jahre, schon eine lange Zeit her, als ich so alt war. Ich weiß jetzt nicht, ob ich damals wirklich die Midlife-Krise schon hatte oder erst später bekommen habe. Aber 45 Jahre ist etwas, worauf man schon mit einem gewissen Interesse, manchmal auch mit Stolz zurückblicken kann. Ich darf sehr herzlich und besonders begrüßen die Abgeordneten zum österreichischen Nationalrat, auch das diplomatische Korps. Ich bin sehr froh, dass auch der Botschafter von Bosnien hier ist, Dragomir, da bist du. Vi znate da Bosna i Hercegovina je moja druga domovina, to je nešto ja vrlo volim. Gut. Ich möchte auch noch die anderen Institutionen begrüßen, die heute hier vertreten sind. Das Vienna Institute for Development Cooperation. Ich habe schon Sylvia Straubinger gesehen. Das Central European University ist auch hier vertreten. Institut für die Wissenschaft vom Menschen, das Bruno-Kreisky-Forum für internationalen Dialog. Der Hannes Swoboda repräsentiert hier unter anderem das Internationale Institut für den Frieden, auch von der Friedensburg Schleining ist der Direktor hier und auch vom Austrian Institute for European and Security Affairs. Wir haben auch hier Partner von der Universität Krems. Mit der Universität Krems arbeiten wir sehr, sehr eng zusammen. Und last but not least, natürlich möchte ich auch ganz besonders herzlich begrüßen unsere großen Kooperationspartner. Ich denke hier an das Außenministerium, aber auch und besonders an das Bundesministerium für Landesverteidigung gerade mit dem Bundesministerium haben wir also wirklich ganz enge und sehr wichtige und sehr konstruktive und sehr produktive Beziehungen, möchte ich sagen. Ich glaube, das ist besonders wichtig in Zeiten wie diesen, dass wir uns vor allem auch den Begriff von Sicherheit etwas breiter denken, als er vielleicht üblicherweise angenommen wird oder wie die Diskussion im Augenblick verständlicherweise im Angesichts des Krieges in der Ukraine oder auch im Gaza-Streifen man sich das vorstellen könnte oder sollte. Ich möchte mich sehr herzlich auch bedanken für die Boardmitglieder, Vorstandsmitglieder, die heute hier sind und auch von den Scientific oder Academic Board, der heute am Vormittag hier auch seine Tagung abgehalten hat. Hier bin ich besonders dankbar und möchte den wahrscheinlich von am weitesten entfernt hergereisten Dan Hamilton, a dear friend of mine. Dan, welcome to Vienna. Vienna for you, of course, is something which you are well acquainted with. And I should say that with Dan Hamilton in particular, but also with the think tanks and institutions that he represents in Washington, D.C., we have a very close cooperation. Ich möchte auch noch sehr herzlich die ehemaligen Direktoren des oiip hier willkommen heißen. Ich bin sehr froh, dass ihr hier seid und natürlich das gesamte Team, the dedicated team, wie man so schön auf Englisch sagt, des oiip, des Researchers, Admin, das ist ja das Schöne und immer wieder auch Erfreuliche, dass man hier es mit jungen Menschen insbesondere zu tun hat, die aus allen Ecken dieses Kontinentes und weit darüber hinaus auch eben kommen. Nun, die Frage ist natürlich, how did this all came about? How did this all come about with the founding of the Austrian Institute for International Affairs? Now, there are two, how do I say this in English? There are two Zeitzeugen in this room who were there at the beginning. Yeah? And one is sitting in the third row to the right from me. This is Ambassador Georg Lenk. And the other guy is standing in front of you. The two of us, we were secretaries to Bruno Kreisky at the time, much, much younger than we are today, of course. We actually, and at the time, and I spoke with Georg this morning in order to refresh my memory, I was not that much involved in this, but Georg was really as the foreign policy advisor to the Austrian Chancellor. And actually, he told me about, and then it came back to me, well, this was the time of great reforms transformative reforms that took place in Austria, something we would want to wish for today as well and for the future. There was also a certain can-do mentality. There was something there where politics was future-oriented, was thinking in much broader terms, and clearly it was also about foreign policy, international relations. At the time, the Universitätsorganisationsgesetz, UOG, a historical breakthrough in terms of reforming the higher education system in Austria, was put in place. Political science was introduced at the University of Vienna and other universities. And then Bruno Kreisky, actually, who was a founder of quite a few other institutions, like I just mentioned the Vienna Institute for Development Cooperation. As a foreign minister, he founded this institute. At the time, we called it North-South relations. That played a very important role. He refounded the Diplomatic Academy. Also, that was all thought in terms of professionalizing international relations for Austria, a small country, not in the European Union as yet. Cengiz has mentioned it. It was in the times of the Cold War, and it was extremely important to have an active foreign policy. And that was the reason, one of the reasons why, together with the Minister of Science and Research, the famous Hertha Firnberg, they decided to establish the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. And Cengiz has already mentioned Kreisky's experience in Sweden, of course. He was an emigrant there. Was really so important for him. He has learned there so much about the functioning democracy, about how to forge a compromise across political borders, so to speak, something we need to think about today as well. So that as the first director, actually, he chose a Swedish national, Professor Birnbaum, who came and helped to establish the institute here. Of course, there were quite a few, like Ottmar Höll, Heinz Gärtner. They all then subsequently contributed to the Saskia Stachowicz, who preceded Cengiz Günay as the director of the institute. So these were some of the thoughts which brought about the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. It's still not really there where I would like to see it, on the minds of the political class in this country, in particular parliament, government, other institutions. Some of them, as I have mentioned, we have excellent relations, but there is still room for improvement, in my opinion, particularly now in the age of Zeitenwende, in the age of contestation, global contestation which is taking place. It is so important that we dig deeper into the causes of the changes that are happening, and of course also provide some policy advice how to overcome and how to tackle the issues. And of course, from the outset, the Austrian Institute for International Affairs was really political in the broad sense of what political and policy means, but strictly non-partisan. This is something where I am a lifelong supporter of. Foreign policy needs to really be non-partisan. There should be that we need to think in terms of the state, and in particular now, and an extension since we are a member of the European Union, of course, also and above all in the European context. I believe this is something extremely important. Now, what we are doing, Cengiz will go into more details yet, but I believe it's important that we are an independent research institute. I repeat, founded in 1979, a crucial year, and undoubtedly, and committed to research in the field of international politics. And I think important is to point out that we are somehow, as an extra university institute, we are doing research and we are working at the juncture between academic and policy-oriented research. Our fellows, they are also teaching at the university. We have a close relationship with the university in Krems. I believe this is something which is indeed important because we are an Austrian institute and not just a Viennese institute. I believe this is important to also underline. Now, let me just by concluding say that Vienna is of course particularly apt to play an important role in international politics since it is the only UN headquarters in the European Union. We need to keep this in mind and we forget this far too often. We are the seat of the OSCE, an organization now under heavy duress and of course very much challenged by the ongoing war and aggression against the Ukraine. And I believe that these are some, and we as the Austrian Institute for International Affairs, we keep in close contact with the international organizations, with representatives, of course also with the diplomatic corps. And I'm so glad I see also the ambassador from Australia. We had a very interesting discussion several months ago about the Western Balkans, because the ambassador is also in charge of Bosnia, for example. So, I mean, I think Vienna indeed is a very good place to meet and to figure out what actually goes on in this world. Now, before I hand over to Cengiz, let me just pay homage to two very important people who have directed and given the Institute a lot of prestige and science and research and leadership. This is my immediate predecessor, Kaspar Einem, the former federal minister of the Interior, who died very suddenly. And we really, I personally, I've known Kaspar for many years, and I really mourn his passing already some time ago. And then John Bunzel. John was the expert on the Middle East, and we sorely miss his advice right now when these terrible things are going on in the Gaza. Thank you very much. Again, welcome. And I hope you will, and we are looking forward, of course, and you will enjoy, I'm sure, the two keynotes that we are going to hear. But now I hand over back to Cengiz. Cengiz, the floor is yours.
I'll keep it short. Thank you, Wolfgang, for this great welcome speech. I would now like to introduce a short video message from the Minister for Science and Education, which he recorded on the occasion of our anniversary. Mr. Polaszek.
Distinguished audience, the Austrian Institute for International Affairs, OIIP, is a non-partisan, independent research institute. Established in 1979, it has substantially contributed to Austria's foreign policy making, as well as to academic debates in the area of international relations and political sciences. It has been an indispensable part of the foreign and security policy dialogue in Austria, Europe, and beyond. Over the last 45 years, the OIIP has developed into a platform for researchers from all over the world, a contact point for national and international media, and for diplomats and international organizations. Its focus lies on priority areas of Austrian foreign policy, like the Western Balkans, EU integration, neighborhood policy, and China, as well as on general questions of international policy. This includes the rise of new forms of authoritarian governments, migration, extremism, peace, security, and democracy. The mistrust in science and democracy remains a personal concern for me. Therefore, my ministry commissioned a study to analyze the reasons for this worrying development and started a campaign to strengthen public trust in science and democracy again. A main pillar of this campaign are our science ambassadors. These are scientists and researchers who go to our schools to talk about their daily work. They aim to explain how science works and which role science and research play in our everyday life, and how its results support evidence-informed policymaking. It is my deep conviction that science and democracy are part of our DNA. That is why we call our campaign Vienna, Austria. I am very glad that oiip's researchers also participate in this initiative of more than 460 science ambassadors active all across Austria. Research institutions such as the oiip are dynamic hubs and part of international research networks, connecting Austria and Austrian research with the world. The Institute is a solid element of Austria's lively research landscape and closely connected to our university system, in particularly to the University of Continuing Education, Krems. Institutions such as the oiip complement university research, and they are important bridges between academic research and the public. oiip's policy publications are of interest to decision makers as well as the public and the business sector. In times of growing global challenges, tensions, turmoil, and political instability, we need institutions such as the oiip. They help us to better understand the dynamics and mechanisms of international politics, to draw the right conclusions and recognize opportunities where others just see challenges and problems. Congratulations on your anniversary and all the best for another 45 successful years.
I'm very grateful to the Minister's comments, because I think it really speaks to our Institute's mission, which is being a bridge between academic research and policy relevant outputs, which means what we're trying to do is do research along and in line with academic quality criteria, but also produce outputs that are straight to the point and make expertise accessible to a broader audience. This is not always easy, and it's sometimes a very difficult task, but I think that we are on a good way in improving ourselves. At least we are trying to do so continuously. Our institute has been very productive over the last year. Just to give you some numbers, we have produced 41 publications. We attended at 19 conferences. We had 71 media appearances, we organized 26 events. We have conducted 14 research projects and lectured at university in 20 seminars and lectures, and all this with just 13 employees. I think it's quite impressive if you look at these numbers. It highlights how active we are, but also how much need there is to transmit expertise and knowledge to broader audiences, which includes also universities, media, and the like. The bridge function between academia and policy research brings me to our first keynote speaker, Dr. Vesna Pusić. She's a former Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of the Republic of Croatia and also served as first Deputy Prime Minister. And I'm referring to her in that regard because she has an academic background as well. She was professor, or still is professor, at the University of Zagreb. So she knows very well how to bridge these two different, seemingly different worlds. And I think it has become even more important nowadays as in many places of the world, democracy is under attack. We need this cooperation between academia, policy research, and politics. Dr. Pusić, if I may invite you on stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. And this seems to be right up my alley. When I entered politics in January, well, maybe even before, but when I entered Parliament for the first time in January of 2000, I thought, A, it was just for a very short while, and B, I thought politics was more or less applied social science, so that I was going to take all the things that I read, especially all the Enlightenment-based political theorists and thinkers, and simply apply it to Croatian politics. I was wrong in both. 20 years later, I left Parliament. In the meantime, I did all kinds of things. But I also discovered that to some extent, not all of it and not all the time, but to some extent, politics actually is applied social science. It does need the knowledge that's stored in the big libraries, whatever form they take, of the history of social science. However, when I entered Parliament, or maybe that was the second time, this is my second term in Parliament, with me, the people who entered as MPs just from my liberal party, political party, were one expert in horse racing and horse training, one former male fashion model turned restaurateur, one worker in a textile factory, one manager of a furniture factory, one mechanical engineer, one gastroenterologist, one very smart high school graduate and civil activist, and myself, who was at that time associate professor of political theory. Just this list shows you what was needed, or maybe on one level what was missing. These were people of very different background, all legitimately elected to participate directly in running the country. Running the country, by the way, is the only job you don't need any qualifications or references for. You don't have to show anything, you just have to get the votes. If you get the votes, you get to run the country. In addition to that, very often the skills that you need to get the vote are very, very different for the skills that you need to run the country. Sometimes different, sometimes directly in conflict with the skills that you need to run the country. So you can be excellent in getting the vote and don't have a clue on how to run the country. Or the other way around, but in that case you don't get the chance, but it's because you don't get the vote. That was the Parliament that incidentally had to deal not only with issues and decisions such as the budget, for instance, which is a thick, complicated document, which the Ministry of Finance always hopes no parliamentarian will understand, so it will just go through. But also the parliament that had to deal with all the preparations and the beginning of Croatia's negotiations for membership in the European Union. In practice, that meant changing the electoral law. Right before that, the parliament also changed the constitution, and we went from a two-house parliament into a unicameral parliament. Changing of the electoral law. Introduction of a new model of selecting and promoting the people in the judiciary, so public attorneys and judges. A new constitutional law on the rights of the ethnic minorities. Building new institutions like public ombudsman, commissioner for the prevention of the conflict of interests, commission for the control of the public procurement. That was also when we were preparing and joining NATO. So decisions that were required from that parliament required also, as you can see, very specialized knowledge and very specific competences in order to be able to make these decisions. And there, applied social science worked very well or was very needed. This is where institutions like your institute, and on this note, I really want to congratulate you not only on your 45th birthday, but on the fact that that people had a great idea and you made it survive for such a long time. This is probably the bigger success, because a lot of people have good ideas, but not a lot of good ideas survive for such a long time. So this is a great success, and I think you can be very, very proud of it. Not only is it a great success, there is a great need for institutions like that, because this is sort of, how can I say, a storage, potential storage of knowledge, know-how, and competences for people who work in practical politics. And those people are people that I have mentioned at the beginning, people who come from all walks of life, who have no obligation to know anything about comparative electoral systems, to know anything about the parliamentary democracy, who have no requirement to know the difference between direct and representative democracy, all of these things that are very important when you are making all these decisions, but at the same time they're being made by people who just needed to get the vote. So institutions like this help, if the governments and political parties are smart enough, they serve as a source of know-how, knowledge, where people can turn to. By the way, these same people that enter parliament, some of them eventually also become ministers. Then, in particular, you need people who you can turn to and ask for advice and ask for consultation and knowledge that you can use in delivering what your program was. The other function is to remind the public of the facts, to constantly be reminding the public of the facts that get lost, especially nowadays, in the populist simplification of things, in the big speeches that show, that try to show or want to show that there are simple solutions to complicated problems, which there are none. As we know, being on either side of this academic politics divide, there are no easy solutions on either side. And institutions like yours, but politicians, of course, tend to go there because it's catchy, it's nice to hear that you know, the problems you've been struggling with somehow have these easy solutions. This is why populism is so attractive. Institutions like this are probably one of the very important barriers to the dangers of populism. To constantly be telling, and this is why these activities that were mentioned here are so important, going into media, going into public, talking to people, telling them, you know, there is also the other side to these simple solutions that are being offered by the politicians. Keeping the public focused and in contact with planet Earth, because very often that connection is lost in political campaigning and in everyday politics. The other aspect from this applied social science that is very needed, and sometimes, of course, also applied other science in departments like industry, like energy, like environment, etc. The other aspect is politics as the art of the possible. And I see this in a different light from what the way it's usually seen. The way it's usually seen is as an excuse to say, you know, can't do any better. You have to stay within this framework of what is possible. I look at it, I think politics is the art of the possible, but I see it in a different framework, not as a limitation, but as a possibility, as the talent to actually recognize the things that are possible and the moment in which they are possible, that maybe people who are not leaders, people who are not in politics, people who are not focused, are not realizing. So the art of the possible is also the talent to see a little further, the instinct to recognize that certain things are possible that might have not been tried before, and that might not be possible if you miss this chance. To illustrate, I will go into a small, short rendition of something that I call, and I think it illustrates it quite well, this point, the tale of small tragedies. The tale of small tragedies comes from my own region. It's been known as the Western Balkans. I would say your own region also. It was known as the Western Balkans, particularly the 6 countries that are not members of the European Union. Why am I emphasizing this European Union aspect? Because I think it's, for that part of the world, it is not only joining a nice club, it is actually an exercise in state building. And this is why that thing is so important, why this process is so important. All the 6 countries that are not members yet, and God knows when they will become members, had at different times moments where they could have been moved forward, where they could have made a big step towards actually building a functioning democratic state, i.e. also joining or coming closer to joining the European Union. And these chances were missed. I'm very proud to have been a player or a contributor, let's say, to Croatia's joining of the European Union and everything that went with it. But I would say this was in a different world, at a different time, in a different world. Things have changed, circumstances have changed. We have to start thinking in a different way of these 6 countries, which I think are more or less more a consolidation of the European territory than real enlargement. because they're right in the soft underbelly of Europe, right, the courtyard rather than the yard of Europe, surrounded by European territory. What is the tale of small tragedies? One of the big problems for Bosnia-Herzegovina at the moment is famous Milorad Dodik, who by now has become a big supporter of Vladimir Putin and disruptor of Bosnia-Herzegovina. However, when he came in, he was a different Milorad Dodik. And there were chances. There was a good chance to actually work with that guy. Even until, I would say, 2010. He could have been a partner in moving Bosnia-Herzegovina forward. However, European institutions didn't, or member states, let's say, didn't make the move then. And unfortunately, the chance that was created by bringing in somebody who was different from the former leadership of Bosnia-Herzegovina was missed. The other is Serbia. Serbia had, in 2001, 2003, Zoran Djindjic, my friend and colleague, as prime minister. It could have moved then. It could have also moved in 2014, when I was present in the room when Serbia and Vučić was there. Serbia was starting its negotiations with the European Union for membership. That was the time when that was possible. Now, they've gone in a completely different direction. I don't think they should be abandoned, but I think the strategy needs to change dramatically. Montenegro, until elections 2020, mostly we didn't realize what happened then, and that was a turning point where then a coalition of Europe Now and Europe Never parties took over, which started deterioration in their European and democratic development. North Macedonia, of course, the Prespa agreement, which was the moment, which wasn't recognized and wasn't grabbed. Kosovo. Kosovo is carpe diem. Kosovo is now. It actually, something could be done now. It can be moved forward now. The question is, will we lose this opportunity? And Albania, that was somehow nobody's priority and somehow fell between the cracks attached to North Macedonia. I'm mentioning these moments even to myself because I think it's so important to realize that this art of the possible means that you actually recognize the moment when something is possible and do it then. Not later with the same instruments, not at different times with the same approach. None of the things that were used on Croatia, was the last member of the last country to join the European Union. These things don't work anymore. We need a new approach, but we need to recognize the different approaches we need for these different countries. I'm sure all of you saw President Macron's interview in The Economist a month ago or whatever. One thing he said was, in Europe, there is a spirit of defeat. And when there is a spirit of defeat, you get used to it and you stop fighting. This, I know he's a controversial leader in the European terms, but I think this is a very, very important message. We cannot stop fighting for Europe and for our survival for the survival of this best project and best ideas Europeans had in their entire history. And let me end with a quote from a great European, close to my heart and your heart, since it wasn't from very far from here, Václav Havel, who said, "Hope is an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much for these important words. It's really difficult to find back to mine. I think that the importance of Europe is something that has almost become a political stance. And this is certainly, I mean, Wolfgang mentioned it, and I think it's really important for our institute to highlight that we're an independent, non-partisan institute, but that doesn't mean we don't have principles and values we follow. And one of them is that we certainly have a European perspective. I think that is non-negotiable. And another one is that we don't compromise on human rights. There is no room for racism. And there is our environment at the institute, and everything we produce and do is guided by principles such as human rights, equity, diversity. I think that has almost become a political message, and I think it's important to state that over and over again. In our work, we focus on areas that are of high importance, as we believe, not only to Austria, but to Europe in general. I think it's a bit too early. Thank you. No, leave it. Thank you. These research areas we follow are security politics in general, with many different headings under this research focus. Then Europe and its relations with the neighborhood and the world. Democracy versus autocratization and how it impacts foreign policy making. And the fourth focus we have is multilateralism and geopolitics. In our environment at the Institute, we have become much more international, and this is really something that has always been part of the OIP. To be honest, that was also the reason why I wanted to start at this institute, because I felt it's a little island of internationality. And it has become even more international over time because the world has changed, of course. We have at our institute 18 different spoken languages, 6 international fellows, 11 interns from different parts of the world, and 13 nationalities all in all. I think that's impressive. And it is, as I mentioned, we are a rather small institute, but it shows how the world has changed. And I think that in such a volatile and changing environment that is sometimes also threatening or feels being threatening to democracy and the values we stand for, or for the European Union, internationality is one of the things we need to cherish and that are important because we can bring together different resources and develop new ideas. Having said that, I would like to invite our second keynote speaker, because I think she also incorporates this internationality, if you like, as her own trajectory, her personal career. Ayse Zarakol is a professor of international relations at the University of Cambridge, and her research focuses on East-West relations, the evolution of the modern state system, and issues of sovereignty and world order, so highly important also for our discussion today. And she's the author of several books, among them After Defeat, How the East Learned to Live with the West, and her most recent one, Before the West, The Rise and Fall of Eastern World Orders. She's also associate editor of the journal International Organization, and anybody who knows about international relations and political science knows how highly ranked this journal is. May I invite you on stage? Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's my great pleasure to be here in beautiful Vienna with you to celebrate the 45th anniversary of the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. I only wish that I was speaking to you at better times for our world. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So my talk today will focus on international disorder, which is something I study. I work on order, and these days I'm heading a British Academy project on disorder, global disorder, trying to figure out where we're headed. I think most of you will agree, I think most of us who live in the West agree that we are in a period of disorder, at least tumultuous times, uncertain times. The optimism of the 1990s has faded away. We no longer think that the liberal international order is going to become global, as used to be the case not that long ago. That idea has taken many hits from the war on terror, the global financial crisis of 2007-8, migration crises, Brexit, Trump, COVID. Since 2022, there's war at Europe's door since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I don't need to remind you. Since Hamas's attack on Israel on October last year, the war in Gaza wages on, putting extra pressures on an already beleaguered international legal order and straining the already weakened ties the global South countries feel to the West and to the core of the international system. In the meantime, an already overstretched global hegemon, the United States, faces the increasing inevitability of a rival China, not just in the East, not just in Asia, but globally, also in the Western hemisphere. So the bigger question is, we are in these tumultuous times, we all refer to it. Where are we headed? What comes next? Which is something my discipline, international relations, has something to say about. And if we look at the established schools of thought, as exemplified by, for instance, realists such as John Mearsheimer, you would have seen him in the news in relation to the Russia's war on Ukraine. Realists would say we are headed to global great power competition. I mean, we're already in it. Great power rivalry. This is about great power politics. And then we have liberals like John Eikenberry, who's had an article published not that long ago in International Affairs, the journal, where he suggests that we are headed to, when the dust settles down, there will be three worlds. The global North, US, Europe, and their allies, global East, Russia, China, and their allies, and a global South. So these are relatively different takes in terms of their optimism about where we're headed. And you may find both scenarios a bit depressing compared to what we thought was possible in the 1990s. But I would like to suggest that both scenarios in some ways are optimistic scenarios because they suggest that we will, there will be some uncertainty for a while, but then the dust will settle down and some kind of new order or a new arrangement will emerge, which will look like the 20th century. Something that is that will be familiar to us. Either the realist reading of the Cold War USSR versus the United States, or a more liberal reading where the global South, or as the third world, as it used to be called, is also kind of in the mix. and that 20th century order, those who lived through it remember, of course, its flaws, but there is something comforting in the 20th century order, however you describe it, especially for those who live in the West, more so in the US than Europe. Europe took more hits in the 20th century, but in general, it was a story of upward trajectory, progress, economic well-being, more rights, more democracy, and then a relatively orderly world, even beyond, the first world, as it used to be called. Some degree of engagement. The rules are known. The rivalry is clear. There is a predictability to it. And that's why I think the established schools of international relations I think are almost nostalgic. They hope that after this period of uncertainty, we will create something that resembles the 20th century. But it is possible, I think, that the 21st century is not going to resemble the 20th century. And it may be possible that the period of disorder and uncertainty we're in now is not just an interlude to something familiar, but it may become the norm. We may be in a period of uncertainty and disorder for many more decades to come. I think we all need to be prepared for that possibility and not seek comfort in nostalgia for the familiar. I would like to suggest 3 reasons why disorder may become the norm globally. The first reason is the increasing agency of the countries that we now call the Global South. I think most scenarios that assume that the 21st century will eventually look like the 20th century underestimate how much the rest of the world has changed. Because in the 20th century, there is the legacy of 19th century, the Global South, the Third World. These countries have relatively recently become independent. Economically, they're not doing that well. They're not major players. But the economic gap has closed down with the core, or the West, and the Global South. And certainly the confidence gap has closed down. Many countries in the Global South want to have their own projects, ambitions. They're led by leaders, for better or worse, who have their own designs. So I think it's too optimistic to assume that when things settle down, the Global South will be an afterthought, or they are unpredictable. Their alliances, their motivations are much less predictable than was the case in the 20th century. So that's one reason why there's more volatility in the system now, and I think things are not likely to settle down anytime soon. The second reason why I think disorder may be with us for longer than we assume is a trend which I call repersonalization of sovereignty, which is an academic way of putting this trend that we've all observed. Sometimes it's called strong man, sometimes it's blamed on populism, and we all know something is happening, and we all kind of study it in our own national context or the regional context, try to explain why this is happening. Trump, Vucic, Modi, Erdogan, Putin, Xi, MBS, but there is something going on where whatever the regime type, it's not a problem just for democracies or autocracies. Every regime seems to be vulnerable to it. One-party regimes, even monarchies, where the power is increasingly accumulated by individuals. And I say even monarchies because, Saudi Arabia before MBS was less a personal regime. There were certain tribal, and other checks and balances. So it's a trend that transcends the traditional categories that we have for comparing and understanding countries. And sovereignty, statehood is becoming personalized. And that increases uncertainty and volatility in the system because individuals can make very capricious decisions. They can be suddenly replaced. They can be friends with somebody at one point and then get insulted and change their mind. And when foreign policy gets personalized in that way, it becomes much more unpredictable. Anybody who studied the relations of Putin and Erdogan, for instance, can attest to that. So it's that personalization, repersonalization, and it's a story of repersonalization because what we have done in modernity, states used to be very personal. They used to be, the fiefs of kings and so on. Modernity is a story of getting away from that, institutionalizing statehood, creating various checks, nations, all of that. And for whatever reason, everything, all the barriers that we've erected to stop personalization of power seem to be breaking down globally. And if that trend continues, I think there's going to be much more volatility and uncertainty in the international order, therefore disorder. The third reason why we may be looking at a longer period of disorder is climate change. I know we're all aware of this, and we tend to think it's unprecedented, and in some ways the climate change we're facing is unprecedented, but there are some historical antecedents. Some of my work is historical. In my last book, I talk about the 17th century, and you may not know this, but the 17th century was much more disorderly than the 16th century because it was a period of climate change, as historians now point out. The world, the northern hemisphere, was at least 2 to 3 degrees cooler than it had been previously. And this had a lot of consequences, but essentially, wars in Europe, the 30 Years' War, rebellions in the Ottoman Empire, all the way to China, Japan. There were troubles in, Moscow. What you had was fragmentation of existing institutions and ways of doing things. Eventually, the world emerged from that, which was, with good news for Europe, particularly. But the period from the end of the 16th century to the last quarter of the 17th century was particularly volatile, unpredictable, uncertain, and disorderly. Given that we are now, again, possibly in a period of extreme climate change, I think we may also be looking at fragmentation, unpredictability, wars, rebellions, and more instability compared to the previous century. I don't mean to depress you, but I guess I have. But for all these reasons, I think our world in the 21st century may be much more disorderly, but we need to be, we shouldn't be in denial about it. We need to be preparing for it. The good news is institutions such as this one, OIP, is exactly what you need in times of uncertainty, because anybody can steer a ship in stable times, but at times of disorder, you need experts, and you need experts with principles and values, so you can make the right choices. So please join me in congratulating and celebrating the 45th anniversary of OIP. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Finally, I don't want to stand too long between you and the buffet, but we are very proud that at the occasion of our 45th anniversary, we have come up with a new format of publication. Reflections is our new magazine, and it is a magazine and not a journal. It's not a book, it's not an edited volume, it's a magazine. The idea is to make what I mentioned earlier, which is also our aim, to make expertise accessible and have straight to the point articles that are not too long because people don't read anymore, and long articles, and no one reads books. I'm sorry to not the entire book at least. I think a magazine is something, at least what we want to provide as one of our products for a broader audience. I think that's the idea behind this. And our first issue has the title "Why Europe Matters." Nowadays, everybody talks about why Europe doesn't matter at all on the international stage, and where it could probably matter. This is something what we want to highlight in our first issue. You can find the issue, I have two examples here, but you can find it outside here at the entrance, and please, they're free, take them, and if you like, also share with friends and colleagues that we now have a magazine. Thank you so much. Thank you, our keynote speakers. Thank you, Wolfgang, and also to the city of Vienna again. Thank you as supporters and friends of this institute for joining with us in this celebration. And my big thanks go to our really great team. Thank you for enabling all this, and particularly Daniela and Petra. All these things wouldn't have been possible without your administrative support. But I also want to thank our previous colleagues, those who are here, predecessors. Wolfgang mentioned Ottmar Höll, Heinz Gärtner, and Saskia Stachowicz, and of course also those who can't be here and those who have passed. Thank you so much, and stay with us for the next 45 years. Hopefully we will be able to celebrate many great returns. Thank you.